How's it going, guys? John here. This is the Basic Expert, and this video is going to be, once again, continuation of our little deep dive into basic fantasy. We're just going through the core rulebook, and I think I've decided, because I've mentioned other things like the Rule Cyclopedia and Lion and Dragon and a few other things that I'm using as supplemental material, I think I'm going to do just like a separate, quick little almost like an appendices video where I just kind of go over real rough overview of like how I use those extra things to kind of supplement and enhance basic fantasy. But I want to reiterate that you don't need any of that stuff. Basic fantasy is in itself a complete game that you can pick up and play. And once again, PDFs are free, books are printed at cost. That is like the biggest selling point for basic fantasy, is that it's just the most accessible iteration of old school D&D that is available right now. Aside from maybe Osric, which I would love to dive into as well, which I've got my print copy of Osric in finally. So let's talk. Last video we talked about we talked about treasure, and I'm not going to go into every little bit of like magic item in here. So if you're looking on page 139 of we kind of went over scrolls, but 139 of the book, physical book, 143 of the PDF, and you can see you have like tons of different wands and staves, staves, and other magic items here that kind of exist as examples that you can use you can directly use these in your game, or you can use these as examples for making your own magic items. And actually, there's another supplement that we'll get into that exists on the Basic Fantasy website that is really useful for creating your own. Let me see if I can. You can't zoom in when you do present like that. That's a bummer. That you can use to present, or to make your own magic items, homebrew your own magic items if you wish. There's a whole supplement for sentient weapons. Let's get into wandering monsters. This is an important part of D&D, of dungeon exploration. And, I have a separate video. It's going to be here on the top, where I talk about random encounters, wandering monsters, and reaction rolls, and how you really need both in order for things to function. So check out that video. I'll gloss over kind of what I said in that video here as we discuss wandering monsters, because there's this mentality, I think, in modern 5e gaming, the modern gamer, where they have this distrust for, or this dislike, not distrust, this dislike for random encounters. They feel, and I was under this impression as well, you feel like every random encounter has to be a battle, has to be combat. And so it turns traveling, it turns dungeon exploration into a slog where you get, especially with 5e's very bloated combat system, I feel like. Bloated HP, and it takes forever to kill something. So if you have mobs of creatures, even if they're not a lot of damage is being dealt back and forth between the players and the monsters, that combat encounter with 6 goblins can take quite a long time sometimes, depending on what level the characters are at and how the goblins are equipped and how they're fighting. That's not the case in Basic Fantasy. You have reaction rolls. Maybe you run into these goblins and you are able to negotiate with them, and I've used this example before, but let's say you run into them and you have an interaction with them, and you're actually able, because they are not reasonable, but they are sentient creatures. Maybe they hate you less than they hate the other tribe of goblins that steals resources from them and they're battling for it. And so they're like, hey, you know what? You roll a reaction roll and it turns out to be favorable, and they're like, hey, you know what? You guys, we hate you less than we hate our fellow tribesmen over here. We'll let you pass through our area unmolested if you you can get to the other side of the dungeon. Maybe just make sure you take out some of the opposing tribe while you're at it. That'll do us a favor. And that makes for a much more interesting game than just like, oh, here's another random encounter with goblins that we have to kill. So I I highly suggest that you use reaction rolls, you use random encounters. It can make for interesting emergent story-like situations that can happen. I am a big proponent, as many people have seen in my videos, of not going in with a pre-written story necessarily for my players. I have plot hooks, or I have things that interest them. There's rumor of a relic in a dungeon over here. Some say there's a black dragon that is harassing caravans across the marshes over here. They say that there's a werewolf over here. I throw stuff out like that. I have no plan for any of that stuff, and as my players pursue it, I am of the school of thought of roll on random tables and make stuff up. So and random encounters really help with generating ideas as to what kind of adventure this is going to be. Makes for much easier prep. I don't know what's going to happen, so I'm entertained along with the players because I don't know what's going to happen. I'm along as the game master still, as a referee. I'm going along with them and on this adventure as well, almost. Even though I'm not a player, I'm the referee. I'm just sort of like, hey, let's see what happens, and then I'll arbitrate as to how things play out. So you have these awesome random encounter tables where you can roll a d12, and one thing you have to understand about old school Dungeons and Dragons is this concept of dungeon levels. Level 1 is like easy mode, and as you can see here, the further down into the dungeon you're going to get, the more dangerous of creatures you're going to run into. All the way down into level 8 where you have a vampire, right? That's high level monster there to deal with. Whereas level 1, it's a spider, it's a sturge, it's a wolf, a goblin, giant bee, kobolds, pretty easy stuff. And level 2's not that bad either. And I like these things here, NPC adventuring party, NPC bandit party, that these things kind of exist in here for players to encounter. Maybe this is competition. Maybe this is someone to work with as well within the dungeon. So you can have placed monsters still within your dungeons. It says it here. Besides placed monsters, dungeons usually contain wandering monsters. The game master may create special wandering monster tables for specific dungeons, or the general wandering monster tables below may be used. In an average dungeon, a wandering monster encounter will occur on a 1d6. So as they're moving, and I do this, let me get my thing here. Actually, I'll look it up here. Alright, so I use this here, this dungeon time tracker. So you have these here, this is the first round of movement that they use when they're exploring the dungeon. The W means that on this turn here, you're going to check for a wandering monster, roll the d6. On a 1, there's an encounter. Anything else, nothing happens. Another movement through the dungeon. On this one here, check again, roll 1d6. More movement. The players have to rest here during this segment, and you're going to check for a wandering monster. And this is equivalent to 1 hour, I believe. Let's see. Each box equals 1 turn, and so yeah, blocks of 6 blocks equals 1 hour, and this is a whole day on this sheet. And then you get some rules down here as well. And again, you have the same rules here for Old School Essentials because they're very similar games. Old School Essentials and Basic Fantasy. I use this. This is a great little tool. I'll have a link to this in the video description. So I use that. I roll a 1 on a d6. I'm going to have a random encounter for my players, and then I would roll on this. If I don't have a custom wandering monster table that I'm using for this particular dungeon, which I again do make sometimes, I will roll on this. This is very useful for if you're making a dungeon on the fly. If I'm using, for instance, my Blue Dungeon geomorph generator, I'll use something like this. And so then you have different levels of the dungeon. Then you have wilderness encounters. Game Master should check for random encounters in the wilderness about every 4 hours of game time. This translates nicely to 3 night checks and 3 daytime checks. If your players choose to stand 3 night watches, you simply check for each watch. In the daytime, check morning, afternoon, and evening. To check for wilderness encounters, roll 1d6. A roll of 1 on an encounter occurs. If a wilderness encounter is indicated, roll 2d8 on the appropriate table below. The Game Master should think carefully about how the encounter happens. Check for surprise in advance, and if the monster is not surprised, it may be considered to have had time to set up an ambush at the GM's option. I use the Rules Cyclopedia. Let me grab mine. So I use the Rules Cyclopedia here for its rules regarding random encounters. So I like these rules a little better because it's a little more clear to me. So in a dungeon or a city, roll 1d6 every 2 turns, like OSC. And when traveling, roll 1d12 once during the night. Roll 1d6 when every two turns when traveling, and roll 1d12 once during the night. On a 1, an encounter occurs. Determine the type of terrain the party is in, and roll 1d6 once during the day, and roll 1d6 once. This is for wilderness, by the way. Once when camped at night. Consult the chart, the following chart for encounter occurrences. So in a dungeon, it's still roll 1d6, and I do 1d12 at night. For terrain type, for instance, you have clear terrain, grasslands, inhabited or settled, and the chance is 1. For forests, rivers, hills, barren lands, deserts, oceans, or aerial encounters, it's a 1 and 2, 1 to 2 on a d6 or a d12. And then for swamp, jungle, or mountains, which is going to probably be more populated with wild creatures and maybe nefarious monsters, it's a 1 to 3. So I rather like that. I like the idea of rolling a d12 during the night and a d6 during the day. You don't do it quite as often. Like the Rules Cyclopedia is actually a little more lenient than Basic Fantasy in saying do it just once during the day and once at night. And so I kind of go with the Rules Cyclopedia thing because I want to have random encounters in my game, but I don't want to have to. I want players to get to where they're going. And Gary Gygax says this in first edition Dungeon Master's Guide for random monster checks, that GMs should maybe attempt not to do a random encounter if it means that the players are going to be slogging through. I want enough random encounters to make the journey memorable and interesting. I made a whole supplement that you can get for free. I'll have a link in the video description. It's very much based on Adventures in Middle Earth. I use that because it creates a wider variety. That system creates a wider variety than just straight old school does. I like explaining and describing weather for travel that can affect their decisions as well. So I use a lot of stuff like that. But once again, you have 2d6s if there is an encounter. If you're using rules Cyclopedia rules, as I've read them here, or you're using the rules from the rulebook here, you have the following different kinds of encounters that you can have based on the environment. So, you have a desert or barren, grassland, inhabited territories, jungle, mountains or hills, ocean, river or riverside, swamp, woods or forests. And we have, so you can get there's a lot of dangerous stuff that's possible here. You have just like a werewolf and a mountain lion and wolf, all the way to like a chimera or a dire wolf or a red dragon, in mountains or hills. And in the desert, you could have a blue dragon or a camel. So it's kind of all over the place. It's not like the dungeon levels where the players could run into something like a blue dragon and they're going to probably want to run for their life. Whereas running into a camel is obviously not as interesting. Maybe they want to try and capture it and ride it or something like that, use it. that could be an interesting little encounter in and of itself. But you can see the variety of it. Like in the desert you run into a merchant, or you run into bandits. Maybe it's merchants being attacked by bandits. You can play with these random encounters to make them even these basic ones, to make them more interesting than just like, well, here's another fight with a troll or a crocodile. You know what I mean? Like, here's a lizard man. I guess you guys are going to have to kill this thing too. I would encourage game masters to really kind of consider via their reaction rules and how the players are perceived by these creatures, by these entities that they encounter in their travels, to mix it up and make the adventure and the journey just as memorable as getting to the destination. We also have rules for city, town, or village encounters, and it says it's important for the game master to remember that unlike dungeon or wilderness environments, cities, towns, and villages are busy places. During the day, most towns will have people on the streets more or less all the time. The absence of people on the streets is often an indication of something interesting. Something's going on. Players walking into town. Why is there no one on the street? Does that mean something bad's going to happen? Is there a dragon loose? What's going on? By night, much of the town will be dark and quiet, and encounters will be mostly thieves or other unsavory types. But near popular eating or drinking establishments, people of all sorts are still likely to be encountered. The GM must make sure that his or his descriptions of the town environment make this clear. Of course, this will also make it harder for players to identify real encounters. And you have encounter roles here for encounters within the city. So you get like were-rats, which were-rats like to live in cities. You get a wizard, lots of thieves, beggars, city watch, lots of different things that you can do, and then you get explanations for them here. For instance, City Watch's encounters will be with 2d6 watchmen of first level fighters, save for the squad leader, who will be from 2nd through 4th level. They will confront suspicious looking characters, but generally will need a good reason before they attempt to arrest or otherwise interfere with player characters. So you get some guidance here on these things here as to what those mean if the players are adventuring or exploring inside of a city or a populated area. You have rules for creating an NPC party. These, again, are random encounters that can occur in these random encounters here. So you're going to probably want to have statistics for that. It goes through that here. What you can do for bandits, for buccaneers, pirates, merchants, nobles, and pilgrims. Some little rules on magic, demi-human parties, so elves and dwarves, halflings, those sorts of things. Then we get to game master information, more game master information here regarding dealing with players. You get some optional rules that I have used before, and we mentioned these at character creation. You can either move points from one ability score to another at -2 to 1 score for +1 to another score. This is right out of the rules cyclopedia right here. The maximum score is still 18, or the racial maximum if lower, and the player should not be allowed to lower any score below 9. You don't want to have a score, but generally not desirable to have a score below 9. So you can use this option here if you're having a character. You want to give your player characters who are rolling for statistics to have a little more customization over their character score generation. You have score swapping. Let the players exchange any 2 ability scores once per character. The full shuffle. Let the player arrange the 6 ability score values as he or she wishes. This allows the most customization for the player, but on the other hand, you may find that all player characters in your campaign begin to look very much alike. It's not uncommon for players to dump the lowest statistic in charisma, for instance, which charisma is a very useful skill. Very useful ability score. That's the one that determines the number of followers that they can have, hirelings, these sorts of things. And then you get some rules for hopeless characters here. You got rules for the acquisition of spells. I like the idea of players finding scrolls and having to study them and learn them and put them into their spell books for magic users. I've heard, and people have commented on my videos before, and I like these ideas too. What if these someone said, like, what if a magic user's book is sentient and it presents information, it presents spells as it feels, as the characters level up and it feels that the player's ready for them. That's a good way of making the whole, like, you leveled up and all of a sudden you know a new spell, which seems to be the way a lot of modern games are run. A lot of 5e games where it's like, oh, I'm level 2, I get to pick a new spell, and so all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I know this spell. That's this idea that your spell book is maybe sentient and maybe teaching you. It's teaching you magic in a way, and giving you spells when you're ready. Is that's a good way of explaining that. I'm still not a fan of that methodology, but I like that there's an attempt there to explain just knowing a spell out of thin air. Personally, I prefer to go through the rules for learning spells. So it says magic users may learn spells by being taught by another magic user or by studying another magic user's spell book. If being taught, a spell can be learned in a single day. Researching another magic user's spell book takes 1 day per spell level. So if they're trying to learn a 3rd level spell, that's going to take 3 days of study in order for them to learn that spell from that spell book. In either case, the spell learned must be transcribed into the magic user's own spellbook at a cost of 500 gold pieces per spell level transcribed. I like this because you got to keep players poor, and you're going to be giving them lots of treasure. They're going to be looking through, you just went over treasure tables. They're going to be finding lots of gold, lots of magic items, lots of silver, lots of jewelry, and so they got to have reasons and ways to spend their money that they're finding on something, and this is a way of doing that. Either the magic user doesn't have enough gold, so the party members pull together because they want their wizard to be good, so they give him money to fund his education, if you will. So I like that. You can read more about this here, but these are all optional rules. You don't have to use them. You can just have it where, boom, they just know a spell. And if your players are okay with that, they don't need an explanation, fine, that works for you. Doesn't work for me personally on a suspension of disbelief thing. I mean, I can suspend my disbelief for like a dragon that breathes fire flying through the air, but for some reason, just like magically knowing something, I just have a hard time logically doing that. It's just a personal thing for me. Weapon and armor restrictions, you got some optional rules here. So you can have rules for judging wishes, and then we get more optional rules. So the rules state that at 0 hit points, the character is dead. If this is too harsh for you, here are several approaches to changing the situation. You have raise dead, which means you don't have to change the rules, but you give the option for characters to revive. You have save versus death. The first actual rule alteration is to allow characters to reduce to 0 hit points to save versus death rate to avoid death. If the save is failed, the character is immediately dead, just as in normal rules. If the save is made, the character remains alive for 2d10 rounds if the character's wounds are bound, or he or she receives healing magic. Within this time frame, death is averted, the character remains unconscious for the full 2d10 rounds rolled, either dying if left untreated or awakening if his or her wounds are bound. Binding wounds of a dying character stabilizes him or her to 0 hit points. Non-magical healing will require a full week to restore the first hit point. After this, healing proceeds at the normal rate. So you've gone to the brink of death and you're almost gone. So it's going to take time to recover. Magical healing will restore the character to whatever total is rolled on the healing die roll, up to the usual maximum, of course. Note that any spellcaster reduced to 0 hit points who subsequently survives loses all remaining prepared spells. So you're still losing your spells. This rule might be combined with suggestions under the raised dead above. And then you get negative hit points, which is what I use. Instead of stopping at 0 hit points, keep track of the current negative figure. At the end of each round, after he or she falls, the character loses an additional hit point. If a total of -10 is reached, the character is dead. Before this point is reached, the character may have his or her wounds bound and or receive magical healing, which will stabilize the character. The injured character may not move more than a few feet without help, nor fight nor cast spells until his or her hit points again are greater than 0. This rule should not be combined with the save versus death option. So what I do is I do my own little optional rule modification here, and I've talked about this before. Players have the number of negative. I think negative 10 is too much. Might as well just be doing 5th edition death saves at that point and getting 3 and doing whack-a-mole, in my opinion. It's too much. Death at 0 is maybe a little too harsh for some people, so I kind of go in the middle. I do negative hit points, but you don't get as much at my table. At my table, it's dependent on your constitution score, and it's half your constitution score. You have a constitution score of 10, you have -5 hit points, and you're still going to lose a hit point a turn. You can still take damage while you are unconscious. You are unconscious too at 0 hit points. You're at 0 hit points, you're down, you're unconscious. You are bleeding out 1 hit point of your negative hit point pool per turn until someone binds your wounds. So I feel like that to me is a good little middle ground of giving a little bit of cushion when a player goes down, so it's not just 0 hit points, they're dead. They have a chance. I think that the negative hit points provides some drama to the situation, so it puts and when you're losing 1 hit point per turn, it really it puts a ticking time bomb on the situation. We got to get to our buddy over here. He's down and bleeding out. Someone's got to get to him. That can make for an exciting encounter when someone's down, and the down person is there like biting their nails, in my opinion, hoping that someone can get to them before their character bleeds out. But negative 10 is a lot, and if you're only losing 1 hit point, that could take 10 turns, and combat in old school is very quick. So it's sometimes the players are able to overcome the situation with that player down and then get to the character and revive them or bind their wounds and stabilize them properly. And so for me, cutting it essentially in half or making it based on a constitution score, which to me makes sense. The higher your con is, the more negative hit points you're going to get. The more physically fit you are, the more in better shape you are, the more damage you're going to be able to take when you are reduced to 0 hit points. So that's my personal rule. We got rules for save versus poisons. There's some poisons that you just take them and you're dead. There is options here for you to change how you want that. Because sometimes it's save or die, and you can change it to be not save or die if you wish. Here we go. Here's something that I wasn't sure about, and that is awarding experience points for treasure gained. And it actually is here in the book. It's an optional rule. Someone had commented on this in the last video in regards to basic fantasy. And it says the game master may also assign experience points for treasure gained at a rate of 1 gold piece equals 1 XP. This is optional, although I highly suggest you use it. GMs wishing to advance their players to higher levels more quickly may choose to do this, while those preferring a more leisurely pace should omit it. Honestly, I think it needs it, because you're still using the old school leveling. Basic Fantasy ups the XP value for a lot of creatures because it assumes that you're not giving gold. This is an optional rule. It assumes that you're not giving gold to for XP, but the amount of XP they get for killing monsters is not ideal in my opinion. It doesn't motivate the players in the way that I want to necessarily motivate them, which is, I think, when you give XP for combat only, or for overcoming combat situations, you can breed murder hobos, which can be a problem. And this is why I think gold for 1 XP works well, because if they're able to avoid all the monsters in the dungeon, but they get to the treasure hoard, they get it out into safety, then they solve the problem. They're still rewarded with experience points for doing so. It works, and it gives gold another use. I'm always looking for ways to give gold a useful function within the game, because I realized playing 5e that gold becomes kind of useless in most 5e games, and that always bothered me. I just never knew how to implement it properly, because there's no real vanilla rules as written rule. I know it's probably there, but nobody uses it for training. I don't know. I just think gold is XP. There's a reason why they went with this when they made the game, and it just works. To quote Todd Howard, it just works. So it isn't here. I'm glad that it isn't here, and I would not keep it an optional rule. I highly suggest that you use it because it's not a leisurely pace. It is, it's a crawl to level up, and it might frustrate your players. So at least if you're awarding gold as XP, you can have your players roll a little quicker. Or level up a little quicker. You got some rules for ability rolls. There will be times when a player character tries to do something in the game that seems to have no rule covering it. In some of those cases, the only attribute the PC has that seems appropriate may be an ability score. Here's a suggested method for making rolls against ability scores that gives that gives better odds to higher level characters. The players roll 1d20 and adds their ability bonus for the score the GM thinks is most appropriate, as well as any other situational bonus or penalty the GM assigns. Consult the following table. If the total rolled is equal to or higher than the given target number, the roll is a success. I don't particularly like this rule. Once again, I'm going to default to the skill section in the rules cyclopedia for this and say that what you should do if you want to use ability rolls is do the roll under system. You can use it for skills, and as they advance in a skill, they get a plus, or in this case a -1 bonus because it's a roll under system to that ability's score roll. So let's say they're good at survival, they're going to get a -1 to their wisdom roll, and they have to meet or roll under their current wisdom score. So they have a wisdom score of 12. You're going to roll 1d20, and you're trying to roll 12 or under, and that means that you've succeeded at what you're doing. And again, you can add modifiers to this to make it more difficult, less difficult, however it is that you do. I think that that's an easier way of doing ability checks than this. You don't have to have target numbers. You don't need to have difficulty checks. It's a much easier system, in my opinion, than what 5e tries to do with difficulty checks, in my opinion. The number's right there. Players know if they succeeded or failed. It's just right there. You got rules for preparing spells from memory. So you can always prepare read magic. You can cover that later. Optional rules for thief abilities. Essentially, what this is saying here is that there's the thief ability is able to discover a secret from levels 2 to 9. The thief improves 30 percentiles total each level. From levels 10 to 15, 20%, and from levels 16 to 10, 10% percentiles. If you wish to allow thief customization, simply let the player allocate these points as he or she wishes. Rather than following the table, allow no more than 10 percentiles to be added to any single thief ability per level gain. Note that also that no thief ability may be raised above 99%. You still want to have a 1% chance of failure. You can use this if you want. It's a good way of giving thieves, players who are playing thieves, some customization with their character. You got some rules for magical research, which is really cool. These are awesome ways for magic users, clerics, druids, whoever it is, to research spells and new rituals, all these sorts of things. So this is a way for them to maybe, if there's a spell that they have not been given it on a scroll, for instance, but one of them is like, I really want to do research to learn how to make fireball. You have rules here for that, which is quite useful. Pretty much the interesting part you want is this part here. The cost to research a spell is 1,000 gold pieces per level for standard spells, or 2,000 gold pieces per spell level for newly invented spells. And that means spells that are not in the book that the player wants to work with the game master to make, that are not, they're wholly original to the player and the GM, which is kind of cool. But that's kind of a rough area. You're going to want players that you can trust with that, because players are going to want to break the game. The game masters are trying to rein that in. The typical thing, rein that in, because the players don't know, they don't understand that maybe the ultra powerful spell that they're making will break the game and therefore destroy the challenge that they have, and they're fun. and that's how a lot of campaigns end early. Is the challenge leaves, the adventure leaves, the threat of death leaves, because a GM allowed something into the game that is game breaking. So use your judgment there. The chances, so you're going to pay your gold. In either case, it's 1 week is required per spell level. So if you're trying to make a level 2 spell that's already in the book, it's going to be 2,000 gold pieces, 2 weeks, and of research. And you're going to, the chance of success is 25% plus per level of the character. So if you're a 3rd level magic user and you're trying to make a spell, you're going to have 25% plus 10%, 5% per level, or 15%, sorry, per level. So that's going to be 40% chance. You're going to roll your percentile dice, and if you roll 40% or lower, you succeeded at making the spell. There's also a minus of 10% per level of the spell, which kind of balances things out. The maximum chance of success is 95%. So no matter what, even if you get to super high level, and you're still not guaranteed to make a spell every single time. There's still a 5% chance of failure. You can also do the same for magical item research. You got your chances of success here. It's a very similar idea. Same for spell scrolls and single-use items. You got rules for everything here: permanent magic items, enchanting weapons, and other items. And this is where you can get some rules here for how to make custom magic items. Again, there's a supplement that's for free on the Basic Fantasy website that can help you craft sentient magic items, which is really cool. Cursed items are always fun, and you got rules for that as well. Dungeon creation gives you some tips on how to notate a dungeon, what each one means. Very useful. Dungeon mapping is an art form, you will realize, and if you've never done it before, so don't be too hard on yourself if you don't get it right the first time. Then you have percentage chance for rooms for stocking a dungeon. What's in it? Is there a monster? Is there unguarded treasure? A monster with treasure? Something special? Traps? A trap that's protecting treasure? And so you get some good rules on different traps as well. Traps are a very important thing that can slow a party down, make them think twice. I really like traps, and you want to put traps in important places. Like, this would be a place where you would maybe want to trap. Like, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the inhabitants of your dungeons who would put the traps there, and like, why would they put a trap there too? You know, you kind of want to edit any random rules to have them make sense. Then you get rules for strongholds. This is very useful for later, higher level characters if you want to use this. The Rule Cyclopedia, again, has its own rules that are a little more in depth that you can look into and do that. But these rules are perfectly serviceable. Again, you can use this as is. You have thickness and cost for how big these walls can be. The number of followers that will be in the stronghold. Again, this is for fighters who get strongholds, clerics get temples of worship, thieves get thieves guilds, and magic users get towers, magical towers, research towers that they can use. So you get rules for that and how to build it, and you're going to want your players, if they get to high enough level where they're eligible for a stronghold, to draw out, after they pay their gold, draw out what they get here, what their stronghold is going to look like. And that's the end. We did it. We got to the open game license here. So you can see Basic Fantasy is pretty simple. And, the next video is going to be about, because this video is already too long. We're at about 40 minutes here. 40, maybe a little less after editing this. But I don't want to talk you all to death anymore. But you can see that Basic Fantasy is a pretty simple game. This is why I love it. It's simple in its rules. It's simple in everything that it does. But just because it's simple doesn't mean it lacks complexity. Like, this is still a game that has strategy in it, has a danger, and is quite a bit of fun. I never had this much fun, as much fun as I'm having with Basic Fantasy, as I had with 5th edition. And I think I realized what it was 5th edition became a chore to run. That's kind of why I left it. It became kind of a chore to run, and Basic Fantasy is easy to run, and therefore a joy for me to run for my players. I really enjoy it. So links to everything will be in the video description. If you want to support my channel, consider looking at my Subscribe Star supporters at $1 and up. You get a dungeon map a week. $3 and up, you get an adventure a month. $5 and up, if I release something that I'm able to share with you for free, you will get that as well. So make sure you check that out if you want to support it. My LibreArt Online website, if you need free Creative Commons art, I put a lot of my own personal art on there, art that I make on my streams, which I will be streaming hopefully tonight at 8:15 Mountain Standard Time, so check that out. But check out Subscribestar if you're interested in supporting my channel. It means a whole lot to me. Check out Cowpunchers, my rules-light cowboy western game. You can get it for a physical copy in Lulu or off of DriveThruRPG. I'm still working on the DriveThruRPG printed copy that I want to get set up there, but it's a little more involved than Lulu is in getting files set up for print there. But I want to thank you guys for watching. I hope this video series has been good. We've got through the whole book, and so I think going forward, I'll do a little appendices video about it, and then I think I want to review Chaotic Caves, because I think that's a really good I used it for my players when we started playing Basic Fantasy, and I think it's a good starting adventure situation that you can use for your players to get them going in a sort of sandbox style game that is already laid out for you with tons of different things for them to investigate and explore and possibly die horrible deaths in. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. I hope that this was interesting and my babbling wasn't too boring. Basic Fantasy is a really cool game, and Chris Gonnerman is a saint for making the PDFs free and printing the books at cost. There's no easier way to get in the hobby, I think, than through this game. It's the most accessible game, I think, with a lot of support. That's another part of it, is that there's a lot of support for the game. So check out my links. Check out the links in the video description. I'll catch you guys later tonight on the stream. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.